The departures board at O'Hare flickered with cancellations, leaving Daniel stranded in a sea of strangers, desperate to hear his wife's voice on the other end of the line. But the phone just rang and rang in the empty house, until a single notification from his teenage daughter lit up the screen, freezing the blood in his veins. "Dad, come home now, but please don't use the front door." It was the moment the foundation of his perfect life cracked, revealing the ugly truth hiding in the master bedroom. If you find yourself drawn to the fragile, dangerous secrets that hide behind closed doors, stay with me to see what lies in the wreckage. The automated voice over the PA system at O'Hare International Airport was apologetic, but firm. Flight 812 to London Heathrow had been cancelled due to the blizzard sweeping across the Midwest. Daniel Thorne stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of the United Polaris Lounge, watching the tarmac disappear under a relentless sheet of white. He swirled the melting ice in his scotch, feeling a strange mixture of frustration and relief. He had been dreading this trip, another week of hotel rooms, client dinners, and empty FaceTime calls. He pulled his iPhone from the inner pocket of his coat. 7:45 p.m. If he left now, he could beat the worst of the freeze and be back in Winnetka by 9. It would be a surprise. He hadn't surprised Olivia in years. Maybe tonight, with the snow locking the world out, they could open a bottle of wine and actually talk. Not about the renovation schedules or Lily's college applications, but about them. He dialed her number. It rang 4 times before clicking over to her voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Olivia. I'm either at the gallery or running after a teenager. Leave a message." Her voice sounded bright, professional, and distant. Daniel hung up without speaking. She was probably in the bath, or perhaps she had left her phone in the kitchen while she read in the den. He grabbed his Toomey carry-on and headed for the exit, the wheels humming smoothly over the polished terrazzo floor. The drive out of the parking garage was slow. The interior of his Audi Q7 was hermetically sealed against the cold, smelling of leather and faint cedar. He merged onto I-90, the windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the heavy, wet flakes. He tried Olivia again at 8:15 p.m., straight to voicemail. A prickle of unease started at the base of his neck. Olivia was surgically attached to her phone. She checked Instagram notifications in her sleep. For her to miss 2 calls on a Friday night was unusual. He tapped the contact for the house landline, a relic they kept only for emergencies. It rang endlessly, echoing in the void of the empty house in his mind. "Come on, Liv," he muttered, gripping the steering wheel tighter. The taillights ahead of him blurred into red streaks. Then, his phone buzzed in the cup holder. A text. He glanced down, expecting an apology from Olivia for missing his call. But the name on the screen was Lily. "Dad, are you still at the airport?" Daniel frowned. He tapped the voice command. "Reply to Lily, flight got canceled. Driving home now. Be there in 40. Is Mom with you?" The 3 dots of the typing indicator appeared instantly, bubbling for a long time, then vanishing, then appearing again. The hesitation was palpable even through the digital connection. Dad. Another pause. The car hit a patch of slush, hydroplaning slightly before the traction control kicked in. Daniel's heart hammered, but not because of the road. "Dad, come home. It's urgent." Daniel stared at the words, the red glow of the brake lights ahead illuminating his sudden panic. He pressed the call button for Lily. It went straight to voicemail. She had turned her phone off immediately after sending the text. Urgent. Was it a fire? An intruder? A medical emergency? If Olivia had fallen? If she was hurt? He accelerated, changing lanes aggressively, earning a blare of a horn from a semi-truck. He didn't care. Another buzz. Lily, but please don't come in through the front door. And don't text Mom. The air in the car seemed to vanish. The heat was blasting at 70 degrees, but Daniel felt a coldness that had nothing to do with the winter storm seeping into his bones. Don't text Mom. That wasn't a medical emergency. That was a secret. He looked at the dashboard clock. 8:32 p.m., 20 minutes away. He knew the architecture of his home better than anyone. He had designed it. The sightlines, the acoustics, the way light hit the master bedroom in the evening. He knew exactly what the front door revealed and what the side entrance concealed. Lily was protecting him, or she was protecting her mother. Daniel pressed the accelerator, the engine growling as he sped into the dark, white-out night, towards a house that suddenly felt less like a home and more like a crime scene. The drive from the airport usually took 40 minutes. But the storm had turned the Eden's Expressway into a graveyard of stalled sedans and spinning tires. Daniel drove with a mechanical precision, his knuckles white against the leather steering wheel. The rhythmic thwack hiss of the windshield wipers was the only sound in the car, counting down the seconds to a collision he couldn't see but could certainly feel. Every few minutes, he glanced at his phone, praying for the screen to light up with a message from Olivia. "Where are you?" Or "Sorry, I missed you." Anything to break the silence. But the phone remained a black mirror, reflecting only the passing streetlights. The silence from the house wasn't just an absence of noise. It was an active, heavy presence. It felt like a door being held shut from the inside. Lily's text burned in his mind. Don't use the front door. Why? Was there a gunman? A gas leak? But if it were physical danger, she would have told him to call 911. She would be outside. Don't text Mom. That was the command that made his stomach twist. It implied that Olivia was the threat, or at least the person from whom the truth needed to be hidden. He exited the highway and turned onto the winding, tree-lined streets of Winnetka. The affluent suburb was asleep, buried under 6 inches of fresh powder. Massive colonial and Tudor estates sat back from the road, their windows glowing with the warm, golden light of families watching movies or eating late dinners. It was a picture of American stability, the very life Daniel had worked 80-hour weeks to secure. He turned onto his street, a private cul-de-sac that backed onto the ravine. His house was different from the neighbors. It was a structure of steel, concrete, and floor-to-ceiling glass, a modernist statement he had designed 3 years ago. At the time, he had called it a masterpiece of transparency. Now, as he rounded the corner, it looked like a fragile, exposed cage. The lights were dimmed low, casting long, distorted shadows against the snow-covered lawn. He lifted his foot off the accelerator, letting the Audi glide silently over the packed snow. He didn't pull into the heated driveway. Instead, he obeyed an instinct he didn't know he possessed. He coasted past his own property, scanning the street. There were no police cars, no ambulances, but 50 yards down the road, tucked partially behind a neighbor's hedge, was a vehicle that didn't belong. It was a Range Rover Sport, black, with custom rims that were currently caked in ice. Most people in the neighborhood drove SUVs, but Daniel knew this specific car. He knew the small scratch on the rear bumper from a parking garage in the Loop. He knew the vanity license plate, now obscured by snow, but memorable enough. It belonged to Julian. Daniel brought his car to a halt, the engine idling softly. Julian, his junior partner, the man he had hired 5 years ago. The man who had sat at their Thanksgiving table 2 months ago, pouring wine for Olivia and laughing at Lily's jokes. For a moment, Daniel sat paralyzed, his breath fogging the cold window. A wave of nausea rolled over him, hot and violent. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together with a brutal, seamless logic. The missed calls, the urgent text, Lily's warning not to use the front door. It wasn't an emergency. It was an ambush. Julian wasn't here to discuss blueprints, not on a Friday night during a blizzard, not parked down the street to avoid detection. Daniel killed the engine. The silence of the winter night rushed in, ringing in his ears. He opened the car door and stepped out into the biting wind, the snow instantly soaking his loafers. He didn't feel the cold. He felt only a singular, white-hot clarity. He walked toward his house, staying in the shadows of the tree line, moving not like the owner of the estate, but like a trespasser. He bypassed the grand glass entryway and headed toward the side gate that led to the garden, just as his daughter had silently instructed. Daniel punched the code into the keypad of the side garage door. 1980, the year he was born. The mechanism clicked open with a soft, pneumatic hiss that sounded violently loud in the stillness. He slipped inside, the heavy door sealing out the wind, replacing the howling blizzard with the hum of the sub-zero refrigerator and the scent of lavender detergent. He stepped into the mudroom, his eyes adjusting to the dim, recessed lighting. The house was warm, aggressively so, a stark contrast to the numbness spreading through his limbs. There, thrown carelessly over the mudroom bench, was a coat, a camel hair overcoat, cashmere blend. Daniel knew the texture because he had complimented it when Julian bought it in Milan last year. Beside it sat a pair of wet leather Chelsea boots, dripping melted snow onto the slate tiles Daniel had hand-selected from a quarry in Vermont. He stared at the boots. They looked at home here. They looked like they belonged next to Olivia's riding boots. The casual domesticity of the scene, shoes off, coats down, was a sharper knife in his gut than any weapon could have been. It implied comfort. It implied routine. He removed his own shoes, not out of habit, but out of a need for silence. He moved in his socks across the polished concrete floor of the hallway. The house he had designed to be an open sanctuary now felt like a labyrinth of glass walls where sound carried too easily and shadows stretched too long. He reached the base of the floating staircase. Faint music drifted down from the second floor. Jazz, Coltrane, Blue Train. It was the album Daniel put on when he wanted to relax on Sunday mornings. Now it was the soundtrack to his execution. He climbed the stairs, keeping his weight close to the wall to avoid the creak on the 7th step. His heart beat a frantic rhythm against his ribs, a drum of war in a silent temple. At the top of the landing, the door to the master suite was ajar. A slice of warm, amber light spilled out across the dark oak floorboards. Daniel stopped. He stopped because he saw a shadow move across that slice of light. And then he heard her voice. "I don't know what to do, Julian. I feel like I'm suffocating when he's here, and I'm lonely when he's gone." Olivia's voice was soft, broken, a tone she hadn't used with Daniel in a decade. "He loves you, Liv," Julian's voice replied. It was low, soothing, the voice of a confidant. "But he doesn't see you. Not really." Daniel inched forward. He needed to see. He needed the visual confirmation to sear the denial out of his brain. He looked through the gap. They weren't in bed. That might have been easier to process. Raw lust was animalistic, understandable. Instead, they were sitting on the edge of the mattress. Olivia was wearing her silk robe, her hair loose. Julian was in his dress shirt, sleeves rolled up, his tie undone. He was holding her hands, both of them. He was leaning in, his forehead resting against hers, a gesture of profound, tender intimacy. Olivia was crying, silent tears that caught the light, and Julian reached up to wipe one away with his thumb. It was a gesture of ownership. He was comforting Daniel's wife about the pain Daniel caused her. The betrayal was total. It wasn't just her body. Julian had taken her grief, her secrets, her vulnerability. Daniel's hand gripped the doorframe, his knuckles white. The rage began to rise, a tidal wave of heat, urging him to storm in, to shatter the glass, to break Julian's jaw. But then, a movement in his peripheral vision froze him. Down the hall, in the deep shadows near the linen closet, a figure stood motionless. Lily. She was pressed against the wall, wearing her oversized hoodie, hugging herself tightly. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and dark, fixed on the same slice of light coming from the bedroom. She wasn't looking at her mother anymore. She was looking at Daniel. Her eyes were filled with a terrifying mixture of shame and fear. She had known. She had been carrying this weight alone, and now she was watching her father's heart break in real time. Daniel met his daughter's gaze. The air in the hallway seemed to vanish. In that split second, the rage died, replaced by a crushing, protective instinct. If he shouted now, if he turned this into a scene of violence, that is what Lily would remember forever. He didn't move. He stood there, a ghost in his own life, watching his wife find comfort in the arms of his best friend, while his daughter watched him die inside. Then Julian shifted, lifting his head. His eyes drifted toward the door, and he saw Daniel. The color drained from Julian's face instantly. He froze, his hand still resting on Olivia's cheek. Olivia, sensing the change, turned her head slowly toward the door. Their eyes met his. The music seemed to stop. The house held its breath. The sun rose on Saturday with a blinding, mocking brilliance. The blizzard had passed, leaving Winnetka buried under a pristine blanket of white, the sky a piercing, cloudless blue. Inside the Thorne residence, the air was stale, recycled, and thick with things unsaid. Julian was gone. There had been no fistfight, no shouting match that woke the neighbors. Just a few strangled sentences, the hastily grabbed coat, and the sound of the front door closing with a finality that echoed long after the taillights of the Range Rover disappeared. Daniel had spent the night in the study, sitting on the leather sofa, staring at a blueprint for a library extension he was supposed to review. He hadn't turned a single page. At 7 a.m., Daniel walked into the kitchen. The routine was muscle memory. Grind the beans, pour the water, wait. But the silence in the house wasn't empty. It was pressurized. He heard soft footsteps. Lily entered the kitchen. She was still wearing the same oversized hoodie from the night before, her eyes rimmed with red, her face pale and drawn. She looked younger than 16, yet her posture held a weary, tragic maturity. "Dad," she said, her voice rough. "Morning, Lil," Daniel replied, his voice sounding foreign to his own ears. He turned to the counter, focusing intensely on the coffee pot. "Do you want eggs? I can make an omelet." "I'm not hungry." She pulled a stool out and sat at the island, wrapping her hands around a mug of tea she had evidently made earlier. She didn't look at him. She looked at the ceiling, towards the guest room directly above the kitchen. "She hasn't come out." "I know," Daniel said. He placed a cup of black coffee in front of himself but didn't drink it. "Let her stay there." Are you going to divorce her? The question was quiet, direct, and devastating. Daniel gripped the edge of the granite counter. He wanted to lie. He wanted to say, "We'll work it out," or "It's complicated." But Lily had been the one to text him. She had been the one standing in the hallway. She had been the adult in the room long before he arrived. "I don't know yet, Lily," he admitted, the truth tasting like ash. I need to think." He couldn't stay in the house. The walls, the glass he had so carefully designed to let light in, now felt like they were exposing him. Every corner held a memory of Julian. Julian leaning against this counter drinking wine. Julian laughing in the living room. Julian, apparently, comforting his wife in the master bedroom. "I have to go to the office," Daniel said abruptly. "Just for a few hours, to clear my head. Will you be okay?" Lily nodded, staring into her tea. "Yeah, I'm just going to watch TV. Don't worry about me. Call me if you need anything at all." "I know, Dad." Leaving his daughter felt like a second betrayal, but staying felt like suffocating. Daniel drove to the city, the glare of the sun on the snow forcing him to squint. The city was waking up, plows scraping the asphalt, life moving forward with an indifference that felt cruel. He parked in his reserved spot in the underground garage of the high-rise where Thorne and Vance occupied the top floor. Thorne and Vance. The name was etched on the frosted glass doors of the lobby. He had designed the logo. He had argued for the ampersand. The office was empty on a Saturday, silent and vast. Daniel walked past the reception desk, past the rows of drafting tables where their junior architects worked, and stopped in front of the corner office adjacent to his own. Julian's office. The door was open. Daniel stepped inside. The room smelled of Julian's cologne, sandalwood, and expensive tobacco. The desk was organized chaos. Sketches, material samples, a half-finished model of the Hudson Project. On the bookshelf, there was a framed photograph. It was taken 3 years ago at the firm's launch party. Daniel and Julian, arms around each other's shoulders, raising glasses of champagne, laughing at the camera. Olivia was in the background, out of focus, smiling at them. Daniel picked up the photo. He looked at Julian's face, the easy charm, the loyalty he had thought was absolute. He realized now that he hadn't just lost a wife. He had lost the historian of his life. Julian knew everything. Daniel's insecurities about his father, his financial fears, his dreams for the firm. And Julian had used that knowledge to dismantle him. Daniel felt a tremor start in his hand. He wasn't just a cuckold in his marriage. He was a fool in his career. Every late night he had worked to build this firm. Julian had been building a life with Olivia. He set the photo down, face down. The glass cracked slightly against the mahogany desk. He walked to his own office and sat in his errand chair, looking out at the skyline of Chicago. He had built skyscrapers, reinforced concrete, steel beams that could withstand wind shears and earthquakes. But sitting there, in the silence of his professional sanctuary, Daniel realized he had built his entire life on a fault line, and the ground had finally opened up. When Daniel returned to the house, the sky had turned a bruised purple, the winter twilight settling heavy over the suburbs. He found the house exactly as he had left it, quiet, temperature-controlled, and sterile. Lily's bedroom door was shut, a line of light visible underneath, signaling she was awake but hiding. He walked into the kitchen, placing his keys on the island. The sound was sharp, a gunshot in a canyon. "I made coffee." The voice came from the shadows of the breakfast nook. Daniel turned. Olivia was sitting there, wrapped in a thick wool cardigan that swallowed her frame. She wasn't crying anymore. Her face was scrubbed clean of makeup, leaving her looking pale, exhausted, and strangely younger. She looked like the girl he had met in grad school, before the firm, before the money, before the silence. Daniel didn't move toward her. He stayed on his side of the island, the granite barrier between them. "I don't want coffee, Olivia. I want to know how long." Olivia looked down at her hands. They were trembling slightly, but her voice was steady. 6 months. 6 months, Daniel repeated, the words tasting like bile. 6 months of you lying to my face. 6 months of you letting him come into this house. My house. Our house, Daniel, she corrected softly, lifting her chin. Though it never really felt like mine, did it? It's your showroom. Everything in here is yours. The design, the furniture, the art. I just live in it. Don't do that, Daniel snapped, his control fraying. Don't turn this around. You slept with my business partner. You destroyed Lily's trust. That isn't about furniture. No. Olivia stood up, walking into the light. It's about the fact that for the last 5 years I have been invisible to you. You come home, you talk about the firm. You go to dinner, you check your emails, you look right through me, Daniel. You treat me like a structural element that's supposed to hold the roof up, not a person who needs to be held. I work for us, Daniel said, his voice rising. I built this life for you. Everything I do, the late nights, the travel, it's for this family. It's for your ego, Olivia cut in, her voice low but cutting deep. You love being the provider. You love the idea of the wife waiting at home, but you don't actually want the wife. You just want the waiting. Daniel stared at her, stunned. The accusation hit him harder than the infidelity. He wanted to scream that he loved her, that every contract he signed was to secure their future. But as he looked at her, he realized he couldn't remember the last time he had asked her about her day and actually listened to the answer. Julian listened, she said, saying the name that hung in the air like smoke. He noticed when I cut my hair. He noticed when I was sad. He didn't try to fix me or renovate me. He just saw me. It started with talking, Daniel. Just talking, because I was so incredibly lonely in this perfect glass box you built. So you replaced me, Daniel said, his voice hollow. I didn't replace you, Olivia whispered, tears finally spilling over. I was looking for the part of you that stopped coming home years ago, and I found it in him. The kitchen fell silent again, save for the hum of the refrigerator. Daniel felt a strange, cold paralysis. He had walked in here armed with righteous indignation, prepared to be the victim. But Olivia hadn't given him that luxury. She had handed him a mirror. He looked at his wife, really looked at her, and saw the stranger she had become while he was busy looking at blueprints. The tragedy wasn't just that she had cheated. It was that she had been starving, and he hadn't even noticed until someone else fed her. I can't fix this, Daniel said finally, the realization settling on him like a physical weight. I can fix a cracking foundation. I can shore up a retaining wall. But I can't fix this. Olivia wiped her face, nodding slowly. I know. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked. Lily, listening. Daniel turned away, unable to look at Olivia anymore. I'm going to sleep in the guest room. We have the gala on Tuesday. We'll pretend until then. For Lily. Daniel? Olivia started, reaching a hand out, but then dropping it. He didn't look back. He walked out of the kitchen, leaving her alone in the impeccable, cold house he had built, realizing too late that it had never been a home. The grand ballroom of the Peninsula Hotel was a cavern of crystal chandeliers and low, murmuring ambition. It was the annual Chicago Architecture Foundation Gala, the night where contracts were lubricated with vintage champagne and rivals smiled at each other across centerpieces of white orchids. For Daniel, it felt like walking into a wake, where he was expected to entertain the mourners. He adjusted his bow tie in the reflection of the brass elevator doors before they opened. Beside him, Olivia stood like a statue carved from ice. She wore a floor-length gown of emerald silk, backless, exposing the sharp, delicate line of her spine. She looked breathtaking. She looked like the trophy wife of a successful architect. "Remember," Daniel said, his voice low, staring straight ahead as the doors chimed open. "Marcus Sterling is old school. He buys the family as much as the firm. If he senses a crack, we lose the museum commission." "I know the script, Daniel," Olivia replied, her voice devoid of inflection. She slipped her hand into the crook of his arm. Her touch was light, cold and impersonal, yet it burned through the wool of his tuxedo. They entered the room. The flash of a society photographer's camera blinded them for a second. A white-hot burst that felt like an interrogation lamp. Daniel smiled. It was the smile he used for board meetings, a tightening of the facial muscles that didn't reach his eyes. "Daniel! Olivia!" Stunning as always. They were swarmed. Colleagues, competitors, clients. Daniel navigated the crowd with the autopilot efficiency of a man who had done this 100 times. He laughed at the right moments. He nodded at the zoning complaints. He kept his arm around Olivia's waist, his fingers resting on the silk, feeling the tension in her muscles. Every time he pulled her slightly closer for a photo, he felt a wave of nausea. This was the woman who, 48 hours ago, had been in the arms of his partner. "Where's Julian?" a developer asked, scanning the room. "Usually you two are inseparable at these things." The name hit Daniel like a physical blow. He felt Olivia stiffen against him. "Julian is under the weather," Daniel lied smoothly, taking a sip of scotch to wash down the taste of the falsehood. "He sends his regrets." "Shame. The gruesome twosome -1, the developer joked, clapping Daniel on the shoulder before drifting away. They finally cornered Marcus Sterling near the bar. The billionaire investor was the night's prize, the man funding the new waterfront museum project that would define Thorne and Vance for the next decade. Sterling was a man of firm handshakes and intense eye contact, a believer in legacy. "Daniel, Olivia," Sterling boomed, raising his glass. "I was just telling my wife here that what I admire most about your firm isn't the steel or the glass. It's the foundation. You don't see partnerships like yours anymore, in business or in life." Daniel felt sweat prickle under his collar. "Thank you, Marcus. We try." "It's rare," Sterling continued, his gaze drifting between Daniel and Olivia with an unnerving scrutiny. "To build something that lasts, you need absolute trust, transparency. If the structure is compromised, the whole thing comes down, right?" The metaphor was so precise it felt malicious, though Daniel knew it was accidental. He looked at Olivia. She was staring at Sterling, her smile fixed, brittle as glass. "Absolutely," Olivia said, her voice thin. "Trust is everything." "Let's drink to that," Sterling insisted. "To the Thorne legacy, to an unbreakable union." He held out his glass for a toast. Daniel raised his. Olivia raised hers. But as the glasses chimed together, a delicate, cheerful tink, Daniel's hand trembled. just once. A sharp, involuntary spasm. His scotch sloshed over the rim, splashing onto his cuff and spotting the pristine white tablecloth. The table went silent. The spill was minor, but the loss of composure was glaring. Daniel Thorne never spilled. Daniel Thorne was steady. He set the glass down hard, too hard. "I need some air," Daniel said abruptly. He didn't look at Sterling. He didn't look at Olivia. He turned and walked away, leaving his wife standing alone in the circle of powerful men, the emerald silk of her dress suddenly looking less like armor and more like a target. He pushed through the heavy double doors onto the terrace, into the biting winter wind. The cold air slapped his face, but it couldn't cool the humiliation burning in his chest. He gripped the stone railing, looking down at the city lights. He had held the pose for 2 hours. He had held the lie. But the toast, to an unbreakable union, had been one hypocritical step too far. The door behind him opened. He didn't turn around. He knew the cadence of those footsteps. "You left me there," Olivia said. Her voice wasn't angry. It was frightened. Sterling was watching. "Let him watch," Daniel spat, staring at the street below. "Let him see that the structure is failing. I'm done pretending, Liv. The museum, the firm, the reputation. I don't care. I can't toast to a lie. If we lose this account, the firm goes under. Julian's buyout will bankrupt us. You know that," she whispered. "Then let it burn," Daniel said, turning to face her. His eyes were dark, empty holes in the night. "It's better than standing there holding your hand and pretending I don't want to wash it." The conference room at Hallowell and Partners was designed to intimidate. Located on the 45th floor, it offered a panoramic view of the frozen Lake Michigan, a vast expanse of jagged white ice that mirrored the temperature inside the room. The air smelled of furniture polish and billable hours. Daniel sat on one side of the long mahogany table, flanked by his attorney, a sharp-featured man named Robert. Across the expanse sat Olivia. She looked smaller than she had at the gala, diminished by the oversized blazer she wore. Beside her was her counsel, Ellen Varkas, a matrimonial lawyer known in Chicago circles as the Butcher. They had been arguing about assets for 2 hours. The house in Winnetka, the Audi, the retirement accounts. It was a tedious, clinical dissection of a life built over 20 years. Daniel didn't care about the house. He didn't care about the money. He waited in silence, his hands clasped tightly on the table, until the topic shifted to the only thing that mattered. "Now," Varkas said, flipping a page in her binder with a crisp snap. "Regarding custody of the minor, Lily Thorne. Sole physical and legal custody to Daniel," Robert stated flatly, not looking up from his notes. "With supervised visitation for the mother, pending family therapy." Olivia flinched. It was a subtle movement, a sharp intake of breath, but Daniel saw it. She looked up, her eyes wide and wet. "Supervised? She's my daughter, Daniel. You can't lock me out of her life." "Lily refuses to see you, Olivia," Daniel said, his voice low and steady. "She knows what happened. She saw you. I'm not locking you out. She is." "Because you're poisoning her against me," Olivia shot back, her voice trembling. "I haven't said a word," Daniel replied. "I don't have to. You did the work yourself." Varkas placed a hand on Olivia's forearm to silence her. The lawyer leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. Her expression was calm, almost bored. "Let's be realistic, Mr. Thorne," Varkas said smoothly. "Illinois courts favor 50-50 splits. Unless you can prove my client is unfit, which, despite a moral lapse, she is not. You aren't getting sole custody. However, we are willing to offer a compromise. We aren't interested in compromises, Robert interrupted. You might be interested in this one, Varkas continued, ignoring him. She slid a thin manila folder across the polished wood. It stopped inches from Daniel's hand. If you pursue full custody and drag this into a public court battle, we will be forced to subpoena the financial records of Thorne and Vance regarding the buyout of your partner, Julian Vane. The room went dead silent. The hum of the ventilation system seemed to roar. Daniel stared at the folder. He didn't open it. He knew what was inside. The buyout agreement he had hastily drafted to get Julian out of the firm was ruinous. To pay Julian off quickly and quietly, Daniel had leveraged the firm's operating capital to a dangerous degree. If that information became public, that the firm was technically insolvent and hemorrhaging cash to pay off a disgraced partner, the sterling deal would vanish. The banks would call in the loans. Thorne and Vance would collapse overnight. This is blackmail, Robert hissed, his composure cracking. It's leverage, Varkas corrected coldly. You want to paint Olivia as a bad mother? Fine. We will paint Daniel as a bankrupt, reckless CEO who destroyed his firm to cover up a scandal. How do you think the judge will view your ability to provide for Lily then? Daniel looked at Olivia. She wasn't looking at him. She was staring down at her lap, her fingers twisting her wedding ring, which she was still wearing. She knew. She had told her lawyer exactly where to hit him. She was willing to burn his career to the ground to avoid losing her daughter. It was a stalemate of mutually assured destruction. If I sign your agreement, Daniel said quietly, Lily is forced to live half the time with a woman she doesn't trust, in a rental apartment, while I try to save a firm that's already dead. She's 16, Daniel, Olivia whispered, finally meeting his eyes. She needs her mother. Please don't make me destroy you. Daniel looked at the view outside, the fractured ice on the lake. He thought of the late nights, the sketches, the years of building his reputation brick by brick. Then he thought of Lily standing in the dark hallway, hugging herself, waiting for him to save her. He realized then that he couldn't save everything. He had to choose what to rescue from the fire. He reached out and pushed the folder back toward Varkas. Do it, Daniel said. Varkas blinked, her confident mask slipping. Excuse me? Leak the records, Daniel said, his voice rising in strength. Bankrupt the firm. Ruin my reputation. I don't care. I can build another building. I can get another job. But I am not handing my daughter over to you just to save my bank account. He stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. We'll see you in court. And Olivia? She looked up, stunned, tears streaming down her face. You just proved exactly why you shouldn't have her. The for sale sign on the lawn of the Winnetka estate had been replaced by a sold sticker 3 weeks ago. Today, the house was finally empty. Daniel stood in the center of the living room, the space vast and echoing without the Italian leather sofas and the hand-woven rugs. The floor-to-ceiling windows, which had once framed his life like a pristine photograph, now just looked out onto a wet, gray spring afternoon. The house was exactly as he had designed it, flawless, impressive, and completely devoid of warmth. He walked to the mudroom. The slate tiles were clean, no boots, no coats. The memory of that night, the night the blizzard trapped him and the truth set him free, felt distant, like a scene from a movie he had watched once and didn't care to see again. The divorce had been finalized 10 days ago. It had been ugly, just as Varkas had threatened. The financial records were leaked. The Sterling account was lost. Thorne and Vance had been forced to downsize, moving from the penthouse suite to a modest shared workspace in the West Loop. Daniel was no longer the king of Chicago architecture. He was just a talented architect with a bruised reputation and a checking account that had been decimated by legal fees and Julian's buyout. But as he locked the front door for the last time and dropped the keys into the lockbox, he didn't feel a sense of loss. He felt lighter. He drove his Audi, now an older model, the lease on the Q7 having ended, back into the city. He didn't head toward the Gold Coast. He drove to a converted loft building in the meatpacking district. The elevator rattled as it ascended, smelling faintly of industrial grease, a sharp contrast to the lavender scent of his old life. When he opened the door to apartment 4B, the noise hit him first. Music. Not Coltrane, not jazz. It was some indie pop song with a heavy bass line blasting from a Bluetooth speaker. "Dad, did you get the basil?" Lily was in the kitchen. It wasn't a gourmet chef's kitchen with granite islands. It was a galley kitchen with exposed brick walls, butcher block counters, and a stove that took too long to heat up. The space was cluttered. There were school books on the table, a pile of laundry on the sofa, and the windows looked out onto a graffiti-covered alleyway. But it smelled like garlic and tomatoes. It smelled like life. "I got the basil," Daniel said, tossing the grocery bag onto the counter. He took off his coat and rolled up his sleeves. Lily turned around. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she was wearing an apron over her hoodie. She smiled. It wasn't the polite, guarded smile she used to give him in Winnetka. It was real. It reached her eyes. "Mom called," she said casually, dumping pasta into the boiling water. Daniel paused, the knife hovering over the basil. "Oh? How is she?" "She's in Santa Fe, with Julian." Lily said the name without flinching now, though there was still a trace of sadness in her voice. She said the light is beautiful there. She sounded okay. "Good," Daniel said, and he meant it. He hoped the light was beautiful. He hoped she found whatever it was she couldn't find in the glass house. "She asked if I wanted to visit in the summer," Lily continued, stirring the pot. "I told her I'd think about it, but I think I want to stay here. We have that concert in July, remember?" "I remember," Daniel said. He looked at his daughter. 6 months ago, she had been a ghost in his hallway, terrified to speak. Now, she was standing in a small, imperfect kitchen, making dinner for the two of them. She had saved him. That text, "Come home, it's urgent," hadn't been a warning about a disaster. It had been a lifeline. It was the only structural element in his life that hadn't failed under pressure. "Dad, the bread," Lily warned, pointing to the toaster oven. I got it, Daniel laughed. He pulled the garlic bread out, burnt slightly on the edges. They sat on bar stools at the small counter, eating pasta that was a little too salty, listening to the hum of the city outside and the neighbors walking on the floorboards above. It wasn't the life Daniel had planned. It wasn't the architectural masterpiece he had spent 20 years building. It was smaller. It was messier. It was broken in places. But as he looked at Lily laughing at something on her phone, Daniel realized that for the first time in his life, he wasn't just housing a family. He was finally home.